Opportunity still, we have another legal expert we've been using through the course of this trial. His name is Professor David Jaros with the University of Baltimore Law School. You've been here daily. What is your reaction overall to the not guilty on all charges?
It wasn't a big surprise. I think we were expecting this. There was not a great deal of different evidence from what we've seen in the past, and so this was not a shock. The judge did add a little bit here. He did explain, he did take the position, for example, that the reckless endangerment charge wouldn't apply because there is an exception in the law for moving vehicles. To be honest, I was surprised that that applied, but he was very careful to go back through and say even if it didn't apply under these facts, he couldn't find beyond a reasonable doubt for guilt in that charge.
The judge did give the state a roadmap, so to speak. I mean, he had two acquittals previously. In his verdict, he explained how he came to this conclusion. What could have the state done with that knowledge if they didn't have any additional evidence?
I don't think the state is mishandling this. I think they have what they have, and they're trying the case to the best of their abilities. There was one difference in this case, which was, and the judge noted that there had been a discovery violation. They had failed to get material quickly enough and turn it over to the defense, so they were barred from bringing in the curriculum from some of the trainings that Lieutenant Rice did, and that could have been offered to show his awareness of the dangers of not seatbelting. At the end of the day, I honestly do not believe that changed the outcome of the case at all. I think this has always been a very hard case to prove. I think the fact that they were aware of the hurdles from the prior cases didn't change the fact that they still had to rely on the evidence that they had. And so going forward, they will still have to step back, reassess whether or not they should go forward on the other cases, and decide if they want to try again.
One of the things that stuck out to me when the judge is explaining his verdict, that the court's imagining is not a substitute for evidence. That's a clear signal that the state failed to make its case, according to the judge.
Well, I think that's a statement that he just couldn't find beyond a reasonable doubt that their narrative is the one that happened. I think it was interesting, and I think it's really good for the public to understand that he said there are different stories about what happened that day, and some of those stories are quite nefarious and suggest a crime, and others are quite innocent and may even suggest good policing. And we simply cannot find beyond a reasonable doubt which one of those things happened. And the burden is, of course, on the state. And if you care about the presumption of innocence and you require the state to prove each element beyond a reasonable doubt, I think anyone watching the trial would have sat back and said the appropriate verdict here was not guilty.
You have said almost from day one, it kind of boils down to what was Lieutenant Rice thinking, what was his perception of the scene, and the judge ruled in favor of what, but this sounds like an assumption of what Lieutenant Rice was thinking in his perception.
Well, remember, because the burden's on the state, he really was saying, I cannot conclude that he wasn't thinking, that this wasn't either simply a mistake. It's important to note that his verdict, an acquittal here, is not a statement that the officers acted appropriately. It's not a statement that they acted inappropriately either, because guilt requires more than mere negligence. It's more than just a mistake. He has to consciously disregard a risk, and I think the judge said he just couldn't find that beyond a reasonable doubt.
Do you think the judge should have, and maybe this isn't good protocol, but could he have admonished the system? Someone died in police custody.
I think the judge is being very careful. There's no question. Everyone in the room understands that this is a case that has political implications, that this is a case that raises public policy issues that the community is greatly concerned about, and appropriately so. And in order for him to maintain that neutrality that gives us faith in the justice system to resolve these issues, I think he's being very careful to stay away from that kind of grandstanding.
You've touched on this in our conversation here today, but if you could expand on a little bit of where could the state go from here? What do they need to do to reassess their cases?
Well, remember, each case is subtly different, and each case has different evidence. And the most important part of that evidence might be the statements of the officers who are charged. So Officer Miller is next, and Officer Miller made a statement. If he made a statement, and I have no reason to believe he did say this, if he said, you know, I thought he would be injured, but I kind of thought he deserved it, it'd be a very different case. When this case started, one of the things we noted was that we hadn't heard what Lieutenant Rice said. What was interesting is at the end of the trial, we still hadn't heard what Lieutenant Rice said, so we can infer there was nothing in that statement that suggested something that favored the prosecution.
You have been asked this, should the state go forward? I know it's not your call, but based on what you've heard in all these trials.
I think that's a complicated question of I think they have to weigh the costs and benefits. They'll have to assess the evidence and decide, can they prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt? Not simply do we believe a crime occurred, but can we prove it in court? It is worth noting that the prosecution of these cases, if you accept that they believe a crime occurred, has uncovered a great deal about policing in Baltimore and hopefully has moved the conversation forward about how we're going to deal with some of the challenges about how we're policing poor communities. So not everything about this case has been a failure, even if there's never a conviction.
Thank you very much. Professor David Jaros, University of Baltimore Law School.